The 2026 Formula One season has barely started, and Red Bull may already be in serious trouble. In China, during sprint qualifying, something happened that nobody expected to see this early in the new era. Max Verstappen could only manage 8th place. His teammate Isaac Hadjar finished 10th. Both Red Bulls more than 1.5 seconds slower than pole position. For a team that dominated Formula One just a short time ago, that gap is shocking. But the real story started seconds later. Because Verstappen pressed the radio button, and what he said immediately triggered concern across the paddock. The power disappeared. Again. One short sentence. But in modern Formula One, that sentence is a red flag. Because when a driver like Verstappen complains about disappearing power, it usually means something deeper is happening inside the car. And this time, the suspicion points directly at the brand new Ford-powered RB22, a project that was supposed to lead Red Bull into a new era of dominance. Instead, after just 2 races, the car already looks unstable, unpredictable, and strangely slow on the straights. Meanwhile, Mercedes suddenly looks fast. McLaren looks extremely competitive. And the reigning world champion, Lando Norris, now has a real chance to extend his advantage if Red Bull cannot fix these problems quickly. So the question everyone in Formula One is asking right now is simple. Did Verstappen just expose a serious flaw in the RB22? Because the data from China, the radio message, and the strange performance of the car all point toward a possibility that Red Bull never expected to face this early in the season. And by the end of this video, you will understand why that short radio message from Verstappen may be the first real warning sign that the RB22 project is in much deeper trouble than anyone inside Red Bull wants to admit. So before we break down exactly what happened in China, and why this sprint weekend could change the entire championship fight, subscribe to the channel. But the truth is, the problems for Red Bull did not begin in sprint qualifying. They started much earlier. Long before the timing screen revealed that shocking gap. Because the first warning signs appeared during the only practice session of the Chinese Grand Prix weekend. Just 1 hour. That is all the teams had. 1 hour to understand the circuit. 1 hour to adapt their setups. 1 hour to figure out how these completely new 2026 machines behave at Shanghai. And that limited preparation time can expose weaknesses very quickly. Shanghai is not an easy circuit for a new car. Long acceleration zones. Heavy braking. Slow traction corners. And one of the longest straights in the entire championship. If the energy system is not perfectly calibrated, the track punishes you immediately. That is exactly what started happening to Red Bull. When Max Verstappen left the garage for his first runs, the car already looked uncomfortable. Not dramatically slow, but unstable. Through the long opening corners, the rear moved more than expected. On traction zones, the car struggled to put power down cleanly. And on the straights, the acceleration looked inconsistent. At first, engineers assumed it was simply early session behavior. New tires. New surfaces. Drivers still learning the grip. But then the lap times began to tell a much more worrying story. Mercedes suddenly jumped to the top of the timing screen. McLaren looked extremely competitive. Even Ferrari, still trying to understand their own package, appeared more stable through the corners. Meanwhile, the RB22 remained stuck outside the front group. Verstappen pushed harder. New tires. More aggressive corner entries. Trying to find time. He briefly climbed up the timing screen. But as other teams improved again, the final result of the session was uncomfortable. Max Verstappen finished 8th. His teammate Isaac Hadjar ended the session in 13th place. And the gap to the fastest car was enormous. Almost 2 seconds. In modern Formula One, a 2-second deficit is not just a bad lap. It is a warning. Inside the Red Bull garage, engineers immediately began analyzing the telemetry. Sector by sector. Corner by corner. And one pattern quickly became clear. The RB22 was not losing time in just one area. It was losing time everywhere. Corner entry. Mid-corner balance. And most importantly, acceleration on corner exit. That last detail matters more than people realize. Because Shanghai contains a straight that feels almost endless from inside the cockpit. If the hybrid system runs out of deployable energy before the end of that straight, the car suddenly becomes vulnerable. Drivers call this clipping. The electric boost fades. The car continues accelerating, but much more slowly. And when that happens, tenths disappear instantly. That is exactly the type of behavior Red Bull engineers began to suspect. Because every time Verstappen exited the final hairpin and accelerated onto the massive back straight, the RB22 looked slower than expected. At first, they thought it might be aerodynamic drag. Then they checked the energy deployment data. And that is when things started to become uncomfortable. The system appeared to be running out of electrical deployment earlier than planned, which would explain the strange acceleration Verstappen was feeling. But here is the detail that makes this situation even more worrying. Because this exact problem had already appeared one race earlier, at the opening round of the season, in Australia. And what happened there may explain everything that unfolded in China. But to really understand why Red Bull engineers became so worried in China, we have to go back to the first race of the season, Australia. Because what happened there did not look like a disaster at the time. But now, after the sprint qualifying in Shanghai, it suddenly looks very different. The opening race weekend was already chaotic. New regulations, new hybrid systems, drivers still learning how to manage energy deployment, and teams trying to understand how the new cars behaved in real racing conditions. But inside the Red Bull garage, one moment stood out immediately. Isaac Hadjar's car failed. Not a small issue. Not a sensor warning. A full power unit failure. After only 11 laps, the Ford unit in his RB22 exploded. For a completely new engine project, that is the kind of moment that sends shockwaves through a team. Because modern Formula One power units are no longer just engines. They are extremely complex hybrid systems. Electric motors. Energy recovery systems. Battery deployment maps. Thermal limits. Cooling systems. All of it working together. If one element is not perfectly calibrated, the entire system begins to behave unpredictably. Sometimes the driver feels it as instability. Sometimes as hesitation when accelerating. And sometimes, as disappearing power. After Australia, Red Bull tried to calm the situation. Publicly, the team described the failure as isolated. A rare technical issue. Something that would not become a pattern. But inside the factory, the engineers knew something important. The 2026 regulations completely changed the balance of power units. Electric deployment now plays a much bigger role in lap time. Energy harvesting is more aggressive. And managing the battery correctly has become one of the most delicate challenges in Formula One. If the deployment curve is slightly wrong, the driver can run out of electrical boost before the end of a straight. That is what drivers call clipping. The power fades. The acceleration drops. And the car suddenly becomes vulnerable. Now think about what Verstappen reported in China. Power disappearing. Exactly the same type of symptom engineers fear when the hybrid system is not perfectly balanced. But there is another layer to this story. And it involves the new partnership that defines the RB22 project. Ford. For years, Red Bull dominated Formula One using Honda power units. That partnership delivered championships, race wins, and one of the most dominant periods in modern Formula One. But the 2026 regulations forced a complete reset. Honda stepped away from the main project. Ford entered as Red Bull's new partner. A massive technical collaboration. A completely new architecture. And projects like that rarely become perfect immediately. Sometimes they need half a season to reach full performance. Sometimes even longer. Meanwhile, other teams appear to have adapted faster. Mercedes looks extremely comfortable with the new hybrid philosophy. Their energy deployment appears smooth, stable, predictable. Exactly what drivers want when accelerating onto long straights. McLaren also looks very competitive. Ferrari still searching for balance, but even they seem more stable in certain conditions. Red Bull, however, still looks like a team trying to understand its own machine. And that brings us back to the moment that shocked the paddock in Shanghai. When Verstappen accelerated onto the long straight during his sprint qualifying lap. The same strange behavior appeared again. The power arrived. Then faded. The acceleration stopped building the way it should. And in that moment, Verstappen understood something every driver hates to feel. The car was not just slow. It was unpredictable. And when a Formula One driver loses trust in the power delivery of the car, everything becomes harder. Braking points change. Corner exits become cautious. Confidence disappears. Which is exactly why that short radio message sounded so sharp. Because for Verstappen, this was no longer just a bad qualifying session. It looked like the same problem appearing again. And if that pattern continues during the race weekend, Red Bull may be facing a much bigger problem than simply starting from the fourth row in China. And this is exactly where the situation becomes dangerous for Red Bull. Because a difficult qualifying session is one thing. Every team has bad days. But what happened in Shanghai looked very different. It looked structural. When sprint qualifying reached its final moments, the performance gap suddenly became impossible to ignore. George Russell delivered a stunning lap for Mercedes. Smooth through the corners. Stable on braking. And incredibly strong on the straights. The Mercedes simply looked comfortable under the new 2026 regulations. Meanwhile the RB22 looked nervous. Through the long opening spiral, Verstappen had to correct the rear twice. Small corrections, but enough to lose momentum. Then came the middle sector. Long corners. Constant load on the tires. And again the Red Bull struggled to stay planted. But the most revealing moment arrived at the exit of the slow hairpin. One of the most important corners on the entire circuit. Because what happens there determines your speed down the longest straight of the lap. Verstappen opened the throttle. Full power. And at first the acceleration looked normal. Then something strange happened. Halfway down the straight, the car stopped gaining speed the way it should. The hybrid boost faded earlier than expected. The engine sound changed slightly. And suddenly the lap was already gone. For a driver inside the cockpit, that sensation is unmistakable. You press the throttle. You expect the electrical boost. You expect the surge of power. But instead, the acceleration flattens. And when that happens on a straight this long, the time loss becomes brutal. By the time Verstappen reached the braking zone, he already knew the lap would not be competitive. When he crossed the finish line, the numbers confirmed it. 8th place. More than 1.7 seconds slower than pole position. Isaac Hadjar finished 10th. More than 2 seconds behind the fastest lap. For a team that once dominated Formula One weekends, this was a shocking reality. But the reaction inside the cockpit revealed even more. Because Verstappen immediately pressed the radio button. His voice calm, but clearly frustrated. He told the team the power disappeared again. That word again matters. Because it suggests this was not the first time he felt it during the weekend. Inside the Red Bull garage, engineers already suspected something similar from the telemetry. But hearing the driver confirm it changes everything. Because drivers feel problems that data sometimes hides. And Verstappen is known for being extremely precise with his feedback. If he says the power disappears, the engineers listen. That is why the mood inside the team suddenly changed. Because the RB22 was not just lacking performance. It was behaving inconsistently. And inconsistent performance is one of the hardest problems to fix in Formula One. Especially during a sprint weekend.